I ended up with my uncle's arch-nemesis. My uncle warned me. When he loves you, he's all over you, day in and day out. But when he doesn't, he'll carve you up, piece by piece. Richard has mob ties. He's ruthless, a killer who doesn't bat an eye. You're just a lamb to the slaughter. Oh. That exciting? Richard peeked his head out. The mob? Me? My eyes locked onto the figure instantly. That sharp silhouette and the face that made me fall for him on the spot. Watching him come down the stairs, I stood up to meet him. Mr. Reed. The man was clearly surprised to see me. But he still answered softly. Miss, I think you have the wrong person. I frowned slightly, staring at the face in front of me. It was him. I wasn't mistaken. I went home last week for a break. At my uncle's party, I was immediately drawn to the man smoking on the second-floor balcony. I knew right then and there I was a goner. But when I ran up to the second floor, the man was already gone from the balcony. After the party, I threw all sense of decorum out the window. I grabbed my uncle's arm and refused to let go. If you don't give me his contact, I'll tell Mom you bullied me. My uncle's temples throbbed from my pestering. Finally, he pulled his phone from his pocket, viciously found a QR code, and shoved it at me. Take it, take it. Just stop shaking me, for God's sake. We chatted for 5 days and agreed to meet today. I took out my phone and pulled up our chat history. Last Wednesday, I saw you at my uncle's party. You were wearing a black shirt, smoking on the second-floor balcony. The man's gaze fell on my phone screen, then met mine again. He took out his own phone. When his WhatsApp lit up, I saw his profile picture was a snow-capped mountain. A completely different style from the fluffy calico cat profile pic I'd been talking to. That was me at the party, but the WhatsApp account isn't mine. I looked at the cat picture on my phone, then back at his face. Thinking about it now, I was totally swept away by that initial spark. This was a man with sharp features and a cool, business-like air. No way would he use a picture of a fluffy calico cat as his profile. So I'd been flirting with the wrong person for the past 5 days? I thought I was halfway to the finish line. Turns out, I was still stuck at the starting block. I really didn't want to admit it, still holding on to a sliver of hope. You're not Luke? I'm not. I'm Richard. All right. My hopeful heart finally gave up. This has to be one of the saddest things in life. But the name Richard sounded a bit familiar. I just couldn't remember where I'd heard it. Just as I was reluctantly accepting this reality, Richard pulled up his own QR code on his phone. So, do you want to add me now? I froze, my head snapping up to meet his eyes. There was no mockery in his gaze, just a faint, gentle smile. It was like he was saying, here's a new chance. You want it? Surprises always come when you least expect them. Yes. The word flew out of my mouth. Richard held the QR code closer to me. As I aimed my camera at it, I could feel my hands shaking. The notification sound chirped. Please accept. I looked up, shaking my phone at him, a grin spreading uncontrollably across my face. Richard looked down at his phone. A notification popped up in my contacts. The other party has accepted your friend request. The Snow Mountain profile picture sat there quietly. The sorrow in my heart was instantly soothed. By the time I got back to my seat, the steam from my coffee had already dissipated. Richard sat across from me, his gaze on the nearly untouched cup in front of me, as if he were pondering something. My heart hadn't stopped racing. Just as I was about to say something to break the silence, Richard suddenly spoke. At the party, you were wearing a champagne-colored dress, right? I looked into his eyes and nodded. My uncle had picked out that dress for me, covered in fine, shimmering sequins. I was worried it would be too flashy, but I never expected. That day, your Uncle Gordon pushed you to go greet people, and your smile was so forced. Later, when he wasn't looking, you hid behind a pillar. That day, My uncle insisted on introducing me to everyone, pushing me in front of all these older people I didn't know. I was so awkward I didn't know what to do with my hands and feet. Who even likes networking? All that fake small talk, I feel awkward just listening to it. My voice was full of resentment. I'd trade being single for 20 years to never have to socialize again for the rest of my life. Hearing this, Richard's gaze rested on my face, his expression more serious than before. You shouldn't make that trade. I blinked. Huh? Being single for 20 years is too big a loss. His tone was casual, but he said it like it was something important, his fingertips tapping unconsciously on the table. You can't go through life alone. I watched my reflection in his eyes, my heart beating faster and faster. It sounded like a casual piece of advice, but I felt like there was a hidden meaning. But finding someone to be with also requires socializing, doesn't it? I played dumb, lifting my coffee cup to hide my face. Richard let out a low chuckle, a mix of resignation and indulgence. You could find someone who can handle the socializing for you. That's not so easy to find. I pouted, but I couldn't stop my eyes from glancing his way. He didn't reply, just watched me quietly. After a few seconds, he spoke again, his voice much lower than before. Maybe it's not that hard to find. The air suddenly went still, with only the rustling of the sycamore leaves outside the window. I saw the tips of his ears turn red, and my suspicion was subtly confirmed. My fingertips holding the cup grew warmer, and I couldn't suppress the smile on my face. Well, I cleared my throat and asked jokingly, if there really was someone like that, would I not have to hide behind pillars anymore? Richard looked at me, his eyes bright. I'd find you an even bigger pillar. His words made me burst out laughing. The sound echoed in the quiet cafe. Like a small stone tossed into a lake, calm on the surface, but with turbulent undercurrents. Just then, the cafe door opened with the jingle of a bell. I didn't notice. A guy in a blue sweatshirt scanned the room. His eyes finally landed on me. Excuse me, are you Mississippi Kora Scott? The young man's voice was soft. I'm Luke. I looked up. He was the guy with the cat profile picture I'd been chatting with for 5 days. I was the one who asked to meet, but right now, all I wanted to do was hide. Not because I disliked him, but because. You have the wrong person. My tone was cold, colder than I even expected. The smile on Luke's face froze, the light in his eyes dimming. The wrong person? He looked down at his phone, then back up at me. His voice was uncertain. She said she'd be wearing an apricot-colored dress. His gaze fell on me, his voice laced with confusion. And your voice sounds a lot like hers. Just a coincidence. I'm not Kora. After saying that, I couldn't look him in the eye anymore and quickly turned my face away. I pretended to look at the sycamore trees outside, but my fingers were twisting into a knot under the tablecloth. The atmosphere grew awkward. Just then, Richard moved. He didn't look at Luke. He just reached out and replaced my cold coffee with a glass of warm water that had just been brought over. Only then did he turn to Luke. Sir, you really do have the wrong person. This is my girlfriend. I whipped my head around to look at Richard. The line of his jaw was tight, and his fingertips were slightly pale. But his expression as he looked at Luke was incredibly serious. Luke's gaze lingered on Richard's face for a few seconds. His lips moved as if he wanted to say something. In the end, he just let out a soft sigh. I'm sorry, my mistake. As he turned to leave, his steps had lost their earlier bounce. The bell jingled again as the door closed. The guilt in my heart exploded. I was the one who asked him to meet, yet I hid behind someone else and claimed he had the wrong person. I didn't even offer a proper apology. The car pulled out onto the street. Richard rolled down the window, and the wind rushed in, dispelling the heavy atmosphere. His voice sounded from beside me. Upset? I turned my head. Richard was focused on the road. You haven't said much since Luke left. So he had noticed. I lowered my head, picking at my bag, my voice muffled. I just feel kind of bad for him. Because you lied? Or because you feel you embarrassed him? He turned the wheel, and the car smoothly entered a side road. I sighed. Both. I was the one who asked to meet him, but I ended up hiding and pretending not to be me. Richard didn't answer right away. The car was quiet for a few seconds, with only the occasional swish of the wipers against the glass. It had started raining at some point. Sometimes your instincts just act faster than your rational mind. You didn't mean to hurt him, it's just. He glanced over at me. It was because of me. If it were me, I would have done the same thing. I looked at his profile. The sharp lines of his face didn't match the tone of his voice. The car stopped downstairs from my apartment, and Richard turned off the engine. He leaned over to unbuckle my seatbelt. His breath fanned across my ear. You can explain the misunderstanding to him and give him a proper apology. The tip of my nose almost brushed his chin. The seriousness in his eyes was almost enough to drown me. You don't have to let someone else's feelings affect you. All you have to do is apologize for your own mistake. Richard's words lifted a heavy weight of guilt from my heart. So, what you said earlier, does that count as a lie? I knew he knew what I was talking about. He paused for a moment. No. It'll be true one day. The auction seats were velvet and got a little stuffy after sitting for a while. I was bored, counting the buttons on the auctioneer's coat, my eyelids getting heavier and heavier. My uncle, Gordon, sat next to me. He wasn't looking at the paintings, but at his phone. I nudged him with my elbow. Uncle, the contact you gave me wasn't his. He didn't even look up. HM? Whose? The one I asked you for at the party. You gave me Luke's. Gordon finally put down his phone, pausing for a few seconds before an I remember expression crossed his face. He turned to me, frowning in thought. I remember Luke was wearing a black shirt that day and chatted with me on the terrace. Although he was annoyed with me, he still asked patiently. It wasn't him? Then who was it you were interested in? Let me think, I'll send you his contact later. I waved my hand at him, an unconscious smile spreading across my face. No need, I already added him. Who is it? I can't quite recall. I was just about to tell him it was Richard. But Gordon's phone rang. It was his assistant. His tone on the phone wasn't great. After hanging up, he grabbed his suit jacket from the back of the chair. Something urgent came up at the office, I have to go. Help me bid on that rosewood box. Call me when it's over. Gordon left in a hurry, nodding to someone in the front row as he passed. The ancient painting on stage had already been bid up to $7 million. The calls were still coming one after another, and it was just noise to me. The rosewood box Gordon wanted was one of the last few items in the catalog. I could only scroll through my phone out of boredom. I opened my chat with Richard, wanting to kill some time with him. There was a slight noise from the empty seat next to me, as if someone had sat down. I didn't pay it any mind, assuming it was some late-arriving big shot. Until a familiar scent wafted over. My heart skipped a beat, and I whipped my head around. Richard was propping his chin up, looking at me with a faint smile on his lips. He was wearing a black suit today, his tie perfectly knotted. He seemed a bit more distant than at the cafe. But his gaze was much softer. Bored? His voice was very low, just loud enough for me to hear. I was indeed bored enough to grow mushrooms. I nodded, not speaking, just looking at him. He leaned back in his chair, relaxing his posture. His eyes swept over the auctioneer, who was slowly taking bids. How about we bail? My eyes lit up, and I nodded eagerly. The next second, I remembered my uncle's parting words. My excitement deflated instantly. I have to bid on that rosewood box for my uncle. I can't leave. Richard raised an eyebrow at my words, a hint of a mischievous glint in his eyes. He deliberately drew out his words, well, that's a shame. He tilted his head toward the auction stage, with a hint of gloating. That box will probably go for over 8 million. You'll be counting the floor tiles here for a while. I stared at his expression. Not cute at all. This man was really not cute. Richard chuckled and casually raised his hand. A young man from the back row immediately walked over. Mr. Richard. Richard didn't look at him, his eyes still fixed on my pouting face. He handed my uncle's bidding paddle to his assistant. Help him win that rosewood box. The assistant froze for a moment, clearly not expecting this order, but he still responded respectfully. Understood. I stared at him, my eyes wide. You. Richard held out his hand to me, the smile in his eyes impossible to hide. Now, do you still need to count the floor tiles? He looked as relaxed as if he had planned this all along. The light from the ceiling fell on his face. The black suit made his expression even clearer at this moment. That touch of distance had long been replaced by doting affection. He leaned in closer, his voice laced with a hint of temptation. I'll bid for him, and you'll come with me for that rum raisin ice cream. The bidding continued around us. The ancient painting had already surpassed 10 million. All I could hear were his words. The assistant stood quietly nearby, clearly used to his boss's spontaneous decisions. Well, let's go. Richard smiled. As he stood up, he draped his jacket over my shoulders. We slipped out through a side door. The wind carried the scent of flowers as Richard leaned down to say something to me. His eyes crinkled with a smile, showing no trace of his usual aloofness. That ice cream shop is in an alley, we might have to walk a bit. Let's go. I followed Richard into an alley paved with cobblestones. The old walls on both sides were covered in ivy, and children would occasionally run past us, laughing. He walked on my left, shielding me from the kids. A wooden sign hanging above the door read the corner scoop. When he pushed the door, a small brass bell chimed, and the owner poked her head out, smiling when she saw Richard. Richard, it's been a while. He stepped aside to let me in first, his tone familiar. I brought a friend today. The owner's eyes fell on me, and she smiled as she walked toward the ice cream freezer. So what flavor does our young friend want? The same as me, but with an extra scoop. Richard led me to a wooden table by the window. At the corner, a cobbler was packing up his tools. The owner came over with the ice cream and 2 freshly baked sugar cakes. Richard wasn't paying attention, and as a small spoonful of ice cream passed his face, a bit of cream smeared on his chin. I didn't say anything, just reached out, took his chin, and turned his face toward me. He froze, his breath warm on the back of my hand. My fingertips brushed against his skin, the stubble of his new beard tickling my skin. The moment the cream was wiped away, Richard tilted his head and gently nuzzled my palm with his nose. A deliberately intimate gesture. Kora. He reached out and grabbed my wrist. A hot kiss landed on the inside of my wrist. Look at me, please. I want to be the one who shields you, so you don't have to hide, don't have to guess, and can just lean on me with peace of mind. I want to be with you. That day in the alley, Richard gained a new title besides Mr. Richard. Kora Scott's boyfriend. As the holiday break neared its end, Richard seemed to suddenly pull himself out of his always in a meeting state. He started showing up downstairs at my apartment almost every day like clockwork. I was curled up on the sofa, trying to decide on a contact name for this new boyfriend, when his message popped up. Come down. I'm taking you out for a late-night snack. I got up, walked to the window, and saw him leaning against his car window, smiling up at me. I grabbed a jacket and ran downstairs. He got out of the car, leaning against the door as he waited for me. Running so fast, afraid I wouldn't wait for you? The moment I reached the car, he grabbed my wrist and pulled me into his arms. He looked down at me with a smile, his hands gently fixing my wind-tousled hair. Richard didn't drive far, just parked in front of the barbecue stand on the corner. I stood on my tiptoes, watching the owner flip the skewers on the grill. His chest pressed against my back. He rested his chin on the top of my head, standing on his tiptoes with me. The owner at the next stall looked up at us. Young love is so clingy. Richard's laughter tickled my ear. We didn't stay out too late. In the middle of our snack, I got a call from one of my uncle's friends. He said he'd be by around 11:30 to pick up the rosewood box from the auction. Richard drove me back to my apartment. I opened the door to get out, and he followed right after me. When are you going back to school? Next week, probably. He hummed in acknowledgement, reaching out to straighten the collar of my jacket. His fingertips brushed the side of my neck, sending a tingly itchy sensation through me. I have a business trip next week. I'll come see you as soon as it's over, okay? You don't have to make a special trip. I'll come back on the weekend to see you. I looked up at him, the streetlight casting a shadow from his eyelashes. Richard sighed and pulled me into his arms, resting his chin lightly on the top of my head. I'll miss you. I laughed and gave him a gentle push. Don't be so dramatic. I'll be graduating and coming back for good in 6 months. He gently squeezed my wrist, his tone carrying a hint of cautious probing. Can I kiss you? My heart skipped a beat. I grabbed his tie and pulled him a little closer. Caught off guard, Richard stumbled forward and leaned down. If you want to kiss me, just kiss me. I was afraid you'd think I was being too forward. I raised an eyebrow deliberately, hooking my finger around his tie and giving it a casual tug. Aren't we boyfriend and girlfriend? Isn't a kiss a given? The words had barely left my mouth. Richard's hand was on my waist, his kiss urgent yet still gentle, as if he'd just been given permission. His scent, a sharp hint of the evening breeze, overwhelmingly enveloped me. It wasn't until I gently pushed against his chest that he let me go, his breathing a little ragged. I lightly patted his cheek, my fingertips grazing his chin. He caught my hand, brought it to his lips for a kiss, his eyes overflowing with a smile. It's getting cold, you should go back inside. The elevator doors closed, but I could still see him standing there. The motion sensor light in the hallway flickered on. I was keying in the code to my apartment. Kora. My hand paused on the keypad. Miles? I thought you were coming at 11. Why didn't you text me? Don't make me sound so old. I'm the same age as your uncle, only 10 years older than you. You're making me feel ancient. The visitor was one of my uncle's friends. My uncle was the baby of my mom's family, so he wasn't old, but he was high up in the family tree. I opened the door and let him in. Let me go get the box for you. No rush. I turned at his words, looking at him quizzically. Miles walked past me and sat on the sofa, his fingers tapping his knee. His gaze landed on the half-eaten bag of roasted chestnuts on the coffee table. Richard had his assistant deliver them this evening. That was Richard who dropped you off just now, wasn't it? I poured him a glass of warm water and handed it to him, nodding. My face felt a little hot. Yeah, it was him. He took the glass but didn't drink. Instead, he looked up at me, his eyes holding an expression I couldn't quite read. You too, you're not dating, are you? I wasn't particularly shy, I just didn't expect him to be so direct. But Miles had practically watched me grow up, and we had a pretty good relationship. It wasn't a big deal for him to ask. I scratched my head, unable to keep the smile off my face. Yup. You're dating Richard? Yup. I didn't get it. Why the big reaction? Dating isn't a crime, and I'm not exactly a teenager. Miles pulled a cigarette from its pack and then stuffed it back in. Don't you know that Richard and your uncle are arch rivals? Back in college, your uncle was Richard's senior, and they didn't get along even then. Later, when your uncle took over the family company, they became full-blown competitors. My mouth fell open. I finally remembered where I'd heard Richard's name before. I'd heard my uncle mention it a few times, but I never paid attention. I had no idea. You really like him? Yup. Miles looked at my clueless expression and suddenly lost his temper. He gestured for me to come closer, and I sat down next to him. You're a real piece of work. Your uncle is going to be furious when he finds out. All I'm saying is, you should probably give your uncle a heads up, so he doesn't have a fit later. You wouldn't feel good about that either, right? I looked like I understood, but really, I was still completely bewildered. Miles picked up the rosewood box and was putting on his shoes at the door when he suddenly turned back, his hand on the doorknob. Tell Richard to be smart about it. The next time he runs into Gordon, he should dial it back a bit. I nodded. I know. Thanks, Miles. I still hadn't replied to the message Richard sent half an hour ago. He must know who I am, right? Does that mean his feelings for me aren't entirely pure? But these past few days, I could feel his blatant affection. What am I even agonizing over? I hit the video call button. Richard answered instantly. When the screen lit up, a warm yellow light illuminated him. I propped my phone against the sofa cushion and leaned on the coffee table. The camera was pointed at the half-eaten bag of chestnuts. Just get home? I asked. Yeah, just walked in. He walked into the living room, tossed his coat on the sofa, and casually loosened his tie. The light fell on his face. My fingertips curled slightly. Are you being nice to me just to piss him off? Richard froze for a second, but he quickly realized who he was. His face was practically pressed against the camera. His breathing came through the microphone, a little ragged. Gordon and I just have a normal business rivalry. It's not some deep-seated grudge. Why would I use you to get back at him? His fingers tapped on the edge of the screen, as if suppressing some emotion. He continued after a couple of seconds, his voice tinged with the hurt of being misunderstood. At the party that night, I was on the balcony smoking, and I couldn't take my eyes off you all night. I turned around to answer a call for a second, and you were gone. I went downstairs and couldn't find you. Do you know how disappointed I was? He suddenly smiled, the urgency in his eyes softening, replaced by a tender memory. Then when I saw you in the cafe, my palms were sweating. When you said you'd added the wrong contact, I was afraid you and Luke had already hit it off and you wouldn't be interested in me anymore. The light on the screen was warm, softening the lines of his face. Richard looked down and tugged at his tie, his movements a bit frantic. To me, you were never Gordon's niece. You were just Kora. My rivalry with Gordon is just business. I don't play these childish mind games. I sat on my side of the screen, listening to him quietly. Was he saying all this because he was afraid I wouldn't believe him? His fingertip gently tapped on my image on the screen. Seeing his earnest expression, I suddenly burst out laughing. All right, I believe you. Remembering what Miles had said, I added, Miles said you should be smart next time you see my uncle. Don't go head to head with him. Don't worry. He agreed, leaning closer to the screen, his voice dropping to a low whisper. Kora. I like you. He said it so bluntly, it actually made me a little shy. It has nothing to do with who your uncle is. I just like Kora, the person. You can test my sincerity anytime. My heart melted into a puddle. I lifted my chin slightly, my tone carrying a hint of smugness. I know. I kind of like you too, Richard. Yeah, I know. After returning to school, I was swamped with graduation matters. My phone was constantly lit up with messages from Richard. By the time I had a free hand to reply, his messages had already filled the entire screen. I didn't get to reply to his afternoon message until evening. The next second, my phone was ringing. Working yourself silly? There's a long weekend next week. Want to go somewhere? I chewed on my pen while editing my thesis. I want to, but traveling back and forth is such a hassle. Richard didn't say anything else, just nodded silently. Until the evening before the long weekend, I was walking back to my dorm, hugging a package I had just picked up. In the distance, I saw a familiar figure standing in front of the dorm building. It was Richard. I froze on the spot, nearly dropping the package. He turned, saw me, and strode over, taking the box from my hands. What are you doing here? I grabbed his sleeve, the surprise in my voice impossible to hide. Didn't you say you were busy at work? I postponed the meetings. He reached out to smooth my wind-blown hair, his fingertips cool to the touch. I missed you. I'm taking you on a holiday. On the early morning flight the next day, I leaned on his shoulder to catch up on sleep. Half asleep, I heard him on the phone. I sent the documents to your email. Try not to contact me for the next couple of days. Richard led me by the hand into the old town. An old woman sat on a bamboo stool, weaving flower garlands. Here to get some flowers in your hair? The young lady is so pretty. Richard had me sit on a small stool while he crouched by the pile of flowers, picking them out with the old woman. She chatted with him in a local dialect. He listened intently, nodding occasionally. I tugged on his sleeve. If you keep picking, the sun's going to set. But he wouldn't budge, carefully tucking the flowers into my hair by my temple. His fingertips brushed against my earlobe, tickling me and making me shrink back. There. Richard straightened up and took out his phone to take a picture of me. In the photo, I was surrounded by flowers, even the smile lines at the corners of my eyes seemed to glow. While we were strolling through the old town, people kept turning to look. A schoolgirl in her uniform ran up to us with a camera. Miss, your flowers are so beautiful. Can I take a picture with you? Richard took half a step back, but just as the shutter clicked, he quietly leaned in. His shoulder brushed against mine. In the photo, half of his face was smiling, his eyelashes catching the sunlight. The evening breeze rustled the flowers in my hair. Richard suddenly said to me, the old woman said, wear flowers in this life to be beautiful in every life to come. I paused, reaching up to touch the flowers in my hair. The setting sun stretched Richard's shadow long behind him as he looked down at me. I hope you are beautiful in every life. Beautiful in looks, and beautiful in life. My eyes suddenly turned red, not from sadness. A petal fell onto his shirt collar. I reached out to brush it off, my fingertips grazing his Adam's apple. And what about you? Will you also, in every life? He didn't wait for me to finish, just pulled me into his arms. In every life, I will find you. One of the flowers in my hair fell out. Richard bent down to pick it up and carefully tucked it back in. It's a shame it fell. It's okay. There will be many more flowers, and many more days. He suddenly stopped, leaned down, and kissed my cheek. His breath swept past my ear. Yes, many more days. The night spilled through the window of the inn. Richard sat on the edge of the bed, removing the flowers from my hair. The touch of his fingertips on the nape of my neck sent a ticklish sensation through me. I flinched. He let out a low chuckle, his movements becoming even lighter. The granny's flower pins are really sharp. He pinched a thin wire tangled in the ends of my hair. Did it poke you? I shook my head. As I turned, my jacket slipped from my shoulders. The dark suit slid to the floor, revealing the torn dress underneath. This is all your fault. I poked a button on his shirt. Now I have nothing to wear tomorrow. Richard caught my hand and pressed it to his chest. My palm was flat against his warm skin, and I could clearly feel his heartbeat. It's okay. He leaned in, his breath brushing past my ear. You won't be wearing it tonight either. Moonlight poured in, illuminating his face, tracing the curve of his brow bone with perfect clarity. I reached out to touch it, but he caught my fingertips in his mouth. The warm, wet sensation traveled up my nerves, making me curl into his embrace. Don't move, he said, his voice husky. His other hand went behind my back and gently untied the ribbon. The fabric loosened and slid down to my waist. His palm rested on my bare back, its heat searing. I could feel the hesitation in his fingertips as they paused on my shoulder blades before slowly sliding down. The last flower from my hair fell onto the pillow at some point. Kora. Richard kissed me. Look at me. I opened my eyes and met his, which were swimming in moonlight, a fire burning within them. His shirt was pulled askew by me, a red mark from where I had bitten him earlier visible on his collarbone. Richard suddenly flipped me onto my back, his knees parting my legs. He kissed me urgently and deeply, as if trying to pour all the longing from the past few days into this one kiss. Richard, I clutched his hair, my fingers brushing against his sweaty forehead. He mumbled a response, but his hands didn't stop. His fingertips grazed the ticklish spot on my side, making me curl up and laugh. He swallowed my laughter, turning it into soft gasps. The bed frame creaked softly, making the painting on the wall rattle. He helped me slide my dress off, his movements slow, as if he were dismantling a precious treasure. His eyes scanned the red string around my ankle. It was a gift from the old woman before we left, said to ward off misfortune. I said, "Take this string off, it's too tight." His fingers tangled with the red string, trying to untie it, his breath hot on my calf. But I held on to his tie, not letting him move. The red string knotted between our fingers. It stuck. I was deliberately teasing him. But he bit the soft flesh on the inside of my knee, and the tickling sensation almost made me kick him. "It's better if it's stuck." He looked up, a smudge of my lipstick on the corner of his mouth. "That way, you can't run away." The moonlight illuminated the inside of his open shirt. I reached for it. But Richard pinned my hands above my head, his kisses trailing downwards. They landed on my chest, my stomach, and finally lingered around my navel, teasing me playfully. "Don't mess around," I arched my back to push him away. But he used the momentum to hold me even tighter, lifting me to straddle his waist. His shirt fell completely open, revealing his toned abs. He suddenly tightened his arms, pressing me against his shoulder, biting my neck until it tingled. I don't know how long passed before the chirping of insects outside gradually quieted. Richard held me as we lay down, his chin resting on the top of my head, his warm breath fanning through my hair. I could hear his heart beating in his chest. "Tired?" He brushed the stray hairs from my face. I snuggled deeper into his arms, my leg draped over his waist. "Not tired." My voice was muffled against his neck. "Just want to sleep." He chuckled softly, the vibration in his chest making my eyelids heavy. "Go to sleep." I mumbled a response in my haze. The room was filled only with his scent, mixed with the faint fragrance of flowers, like a gentle trap. When my uncle made his surprise visit, I was straddling Richard's lap, my head down, playing with his tie. When he looked up to kiss me, there was an urgency to it. "Don't tease." He grabbed my mischievous hand, his thumb rubbing the soft skin on the inside of my wrist, his Adam's apple bobbing. "If you move again." Before he could finish, the doorbell suddenly rang. I looked through the peephole. Oh, crap. It was my uncle. I turned my head. "It's my uncle, you need to hide, quick." Only after watching Richard disappear into my bedroom did I frantically wipe my kiss-swollen lips. The moment I opened the door, my uncle's gaze landed on my lips, and his brow furrowed instantly. "Why are your lips so red? What did you eat?" "I was just trying on a new lipstick." He didn't seem to doubt it. I stepped aside to let him in, my fingers still trembling. My uncle sat down right where Richard had been sitting. His eyes fell on the 2 mugs on the coffee table. I was about to explain, when he suddenly said, out of the blue, "Last Wednesday, Peter saw Richard downstairs at your dorm." My uncle's bodyguard. The moment he said that, I knew he'd had someone watching me. I'd suspected it. Richard? He was giving a lecture at our school that day, why would he be at my dorm? He probably saw wrong. My uncle didn't answer, picking up the mug on the table. It was the one Richard had used. I could see the veins popping on the back of his hand. "A lecture?" He let out a short laugh, devoid of any emotion. "Mr. Richard is so busy, he'd pass on the South Side project to me just to give some lecture." I secretly glanced towards the bedroom. It was quiet. I wondered if Richard had heard. I casually grabbed a cherry that Richard had brought, trying to hide my panic. He's a distinguished alumnus. It's normal for him to come back and share his experience. normal?" My uncle leaned in, so close I could smell his scent. It was completely different from Richard's. One was cool and sharp, the other warm and deep. "So it's also normal for him to hang around your dorm with you until late at night after his lecture?" I was speechless. So Peter hadn't just seen him, he'd been watching for a long time. My uncle's gaze swept over my reddening ears, and he leaned back into the sofa. His tone relaxed, as if he were just making small talk. "That picture from Q City on your social media, it's a good shot." After that trip, I deliberately posted a photo. In the picture, I was standing in front of a flower stall, smiling happily. The most conspicuous thing was the hand hovering over my head, holding a flower and about to place it in my hair. A familiar watch chain was visible at the cuff. It was the one Richard often wore. "The flower lady has some skills." He said it slowly, his fingertips tapping on his knee. A soft noise suddenly came from the bedroom. My uncle's gaze instantly shot to the bedroom door. He didn't move, just turned back to stare at me, his eyes like a net. "You don't have to hide it from me." Saying that, he pulled out his phone. He brought up a photo and held it in front of me. It wasn't the one I posted, but a much clearer one. Richard was leaning down, tucking a flower into my hair, sunlight falling on his face. The smile in his eyes was impossible to hide. "This picture is clearer than yours." He put his phone away, his finger tapping the screen. I just hadn't expected Peter to have been watching me for longer than I thought. So my uncle knew about Q City all along, he just never said anything. The living room light cast a shadow over his head. Half of his face was in darkness, and the chill in his tone made the air feel colder. "Do you know about his background?" My uncle leaned forward, his eyes darkening, carrying a deliberately intimidating pressure. "Back in the day, down south, who knows how much dirty business his grandfather was involved in. Even now, the old-timers on the streets have to call him young master when they see him." His voice was tinged with sarcasm. "When he loves you, he's all over you, day in and day out. But when he doesn't, he'll carve you up, piece by piece. And you're just a little lamb on his chopping block. When you get slaughtered is all up to him." The seriousness in his eyes wasn't fake. He really believed this stuff, or rather, he wanted to believe it so that I would be scared. "Uncle, he's not like that." "How do you know he's not?" He suddenly raised his voice, but then quickly lowered it again, as if afraid of scaring me. "I know him too well. He smiles at you on the surface, but who knows how he's plotting against you behind your back, how he's using you to get to me." My uncle stood up and paced around the living room. His back looked agitated, and a little helpless. He kept his back to me, his voice muffled. He kept his back to me, his voice muffled. "Kora, I'm not trying to stop you." He paused, not saying any more. After a long moment, he turned and sat back down across from me. He picked up his phone, opened that photo again, and his fingertip gently touched the flower in my hair. "This flower is pretty. When Richard was putting it in your hair, was he smiling?" He asked this so suddenly. The doorknob to the bedroom turned. Richard poked his head out, breaking the strange atmosphere. "The mob? Me?" He walked out of the bedroom. The collar of his white shirt was still open, the cuffs casually rolled up to his forearms. He didn't look at me, walking straight to stand in front of me. He perfectly blocked my uncle's sharp gaze. Why say things like that to scare her? My uncle's knuckles were white as he clutched his phone. He stared at Richard, a cold sneer on his lips. "What? Can't hide anymore?" Finally decided to come out. It was only then that I realized those harsh words weren't meant for me at all. My uncle knew Richard was in the bedroom all along. He said those awful things on purpose to force Richard out. Richard moved to the side slightly, gently pulling me behind him. I was completely hidden in his shadow. "Hide." He glanced down at my hand clutching the corner of his shirt. When he looked up again, his eyes met my uncle's. I just didn't want to put her in a difficult position. "If you want to give me a warning, you don't have to scare her." Come at me directly. My uncle's gaze fell on the red mark on his neck. His tone was icy. So you're not worried about putting her in a difficult position now? You know I can't stand you, yet you keep clinging to her. What are your real intentions? Richard shielded me even more. I like her, and I want to be with her. It has nothing to do with whether you like me or not. There wasn't the sustained explosion I expected. My uncle sat back down on the sofa, casually crossing his legs. Posting a picture with the watch showing, Miles taught you that trick, right? I peeked out from behind Richard, still clutching his shirt. It wasn't Miles' idea, I thought of it myself. I didn't want to hide it from you. You're my uncle, and if I'm dating someone, you should know. Richard's fingertips gently touched the back of my hand. I tightened my grip in response. My uncle looked at our clasped hands and tooted softly, as if disgusted by our affection. You were so clueless as a kid. Now you're dating and you've learned to be cunning. I pouted but didn't dare to talk back. Richard squeezed my hand. He looked up at Gordon, his tone a bit softer than before. Kora and I are together, and we have nothing to hide. My uncle just glanced at Richard before looking away. An idea popped into my head. I sidled up to my uncle, tugging on his sleeve and whining. Uncle, I know you're worried about me. But I can feel for myself whether Richard is good to me or not. I looked back at Richard, who was looking right at me. My uncle's gaze darted back and forth between us. It finally landed on the red mark on Richard's neck, and his brow furrowed again. But he didn't say any more harsh words. He gently pulled his hand away. All right, that's enough. You two are making me sick. My uncle stood up and straightened his clothes. He stopped at the door and turned back to look at us. I'm not getting involved with you two anymore. Just be smart about it. The door closed, and the living room fell silent. Richard and I were still standing there, stunned. After a long moment, I whipped my head around to look at Richard. Did my uncle just agree? The tension in Richard's eyes finally eased a little. He reached out and ruffled my hair, a hint of a smile in his voice. Yes. I threw myself into his arms, wrapping my arms tightly around his waist and burying my face in his shirt. Richard looked down, his chin resting on the top of my head. It's my fault. I put you in a tough spot. No, it's not. I looked up at him, poking the red mark on his neck. If you hadn't been here, I would have been even more flustered. He caught my mischievous hand and brought it to his lips for a kiss. The living room was quiet. There was only the sound of our mingled breaths and the steady beat of our hearts. I suddenly remembered something and pulled him toward the sofa. When my uncle saw your neck earlier, his face was practically black. Richard sat down with me. He raised an eyebrow at my words and touched the mark on his neck. A mischievous glint appeared in his eyes. So next time, should I pick a more hidden spot? Richard. My face turned red, and I reached out to cover his mouth. But he caught my wrist and pulled me into his arms. He leaned in. His nose brushed against mine, his breath warm. Kora, he said, his voice low and serious. Thank you. For what? For daring to stand by my side. He kissed the corner of my lips. I looked at my reflection in his eyes and suddenly felt my nose tingle. Of course, I dare. I stood on my toes and kissed his chin. You're the one I chose. Bonus chapter, Wedding Night. The wedding attendant smiled as she placed the last golden hairpin in Kora's hair. Mr. Richard is waiting downstairs. Kora couldn't help but smile, her fingertips gently touching the tassels of her bridal crown. Suddenly, the sound of festive horns erupted from the courtyard, loud and joyous. The attendant helped her to her feet. The train of her grand red wedding gown, embroidered with auspicious dragons and phoenixes, shimmered in the morning light. The auspicious moment is here. The red candles in the bridal chamber burned brightly. Richard, are you nervous? Kora asked softly. Richard paused, thought for a moment, then nodded honestly. A little. She laughed at his honesty, her fingers tracing his reddening ear. Me too. A red candle sputtered, making a soft crackling sound. Richard leaned down, his kiss landing on her brow, then the corner of her eye, finally settling on her lips. His kiss was light, filled with a restrained reverence. Kora's fingers threaded through his hair, pulling him closer. She tugged open the sash of his wedding robe, revealing his strong shoulders and back. She suddenly remembered that night in Q City he had held her just like this, wrapped in his arms. She was breathing heavily, her fingertips tracing the lapels of his shirt. Richard bit her lip as he slid the wedding gown down to her waist. Kora looked at her reflection in his eyes and suddenly felt them well up. Richard paused, leaning down to kiss away the tear at the corner of her lip. He lifted her onto the bed, the red silk wedding veil sliding from the pillow. He undid the tie of her inner garment with his teeth, his warm breath sweeping over the hollow of her neck, making her tremble slightly. Don't be afraid. He kissed her collarbone, his voice hoarse as if forged in fire. I'll be gentle. The bed curtains fell, hiding the room's intimate scene from view. In the flickering candlelight, you could see the shadows of the intertwined lotuses on the brocade quilt swaying. Richard's hand stroked the soft flesh of her back, where a red mark remained from where he'd accidentally pressed too hard that afternoon. He leaned down to kiss it, as if atoning. Kora's legs wrapped around his waist, her fingertips digging into the muscles of his back. He suddenly stopped, panting in her ear, his hot breath fanning across her skin. Kora. She opened her eyes and saw the candlelight dancing on his eyelashes. His movements slowed. The red candles had burned down to the last third of the night before Richard finally held her and rested. Kora was too tired to open her eyes, her nose nuzzled against his neck. Richard held the woman in his arms. Listening to her even breathing, he gently traced the red marks on her back with his fingertips, his eyes full of tenderness. The moonlight crept in through the window, illuminating the words they promised to grow old together on the marriage certificate that had fallen beside the bed.